revised allocation. Because no student weights are included in that August 1st enrollment, because we know that the virtual charter schools continue to enroll throughout August, that's where we get those very large, very significant midterm adjustments. Last year there was a bill that was presented that might bring the virtual charter schools more in line to a traditional initial allocation to reduce those midterm adjustment needs. It's my understanding it wouldn't result in any more or any less funding, but a bill similar to that would address this complicated problem of the midterm adjustments. The schools receive foundational state aid and other state allocations, textbook money, reading sufficiency, etc. And they receive federal funds. Only the state aid funds flow through the statewide virtual charter school office because we are only a state agency. So federal funds are managed directly from the State Department of Education to the virtual charter schools, just as they are for any other public school. They do not, virtual charter schools, as Dr. Heim alluded to, they don't have any bonding capacity, do not receive local funds, they do not receive building fund from the state. That would be a little bit different. And then of course no transportation funding or child nutrition because that need isn't there. On the next slide, I just kind of listed some of the differences in the financial management of virtual schools as compared to other types of schools, brick and mortar schools. In terms of personnel, the cost might be a little different. Staffing may be different. The types of training that an online teacher would need are a little different from others. In some cases, even travel would be maybe for teachers and staff would be a little more significant because they are statewide serving students across the state. Of course, it's technology cost, online products and services. Those kinds of expenses would most likely be much larger for a virtual charter school or any virtual school as opposed to other kinds of costs. School operations would be different because they don't manage the type of large buildings, but they do have, of course, other operational costs. Management costs become involved, and of course the funding is slightly different from other schools. Virtual education funding considerations. I have several slides with this same topic. I just wanted to point out some of the research that has been done. The Statewide Virtual Charter School Board is a member of INACL. It's the international organization for K through 12 online learning. They are a respected organization. We trust their information. One of the quotes that I read regarding actual cost is that quality online learning is cost effective, that the real costs include teachers with certain kinds of expertise, curriculum development, licensing, computers, course delivery, data systems, then in addition, plus all of the special services that any child requires. And then there are also some physical materials involved. But INACL went on to state that maybe the real cost is, our benefit that comes is that they're able sometimes to deliver a broader curriculum that other districts may be able to provide for lots of different kinds of reasons. There was a study that was conducted. INACL actually commissioned this particular study as well, and they identified 5 broad categories that anyone that is thinking about policy in relationship to real costs for online learning should consider, and that's the management, the instruction, the course development, the technology setup, and the technology personnel that are required for effective delivery of online learning. On the next slide, a couple of other quotes from INACL that speak to real cost. I gave the source of where you can find that particular information. It's the operating costs of online programs are about the same as the operating cost of a regular brick and mortar school. Then they go on to deliver that, information that the cost of a full-time virtual school is between 93 and 98% of traditional school costs. So in that particular document, you could find, where they speak to that general topic, more in depth than we're able to do in 10 minutes in this presentation. Virtual chart education considerations again. This was a typical online school total per pupil based on a kind of a national per pupil expenditure of 65%. And the study that I referenced in the prior two slides found that in general teacher cost was less than you might find in a brick and mortar at only 26%. However, there were needs of those teachers that were very specific to online learning. That may be one thing that we need to think about in terms of real costs down the road, is that this is 2019, soon to be 2020. And so the students that were born in the 21st century in 2000, in the next few years, they're going to be married, they're going to be raising families, and those 21st century families are going to be selecting online opportunities for their kids. They may look very different. They may be supplemental while in their local school districts. They may be in full-time or part-time situations, full-time enrollment in a local school district, but attending full-time. And then we don't even know really what those technology opportunities will be as we look at real costs down the road. You know, I was taking a correspondence course when I had a scheduling conflict and trying to finish a degree. And it would have never dawned on me that that correspondence course today would have meant me sitting at a computer and taking a course online. So we have to think about real costs today, real costs 10, 15 years down the road, and how technology may evolve and may change.
Dr. Wilkinson, we are down to about 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to move on. So you see those costs in the next slide. Virtual, I'm going to let you look at that one yourself. I did reference 2 states that are asking the same kinds of questions that we're asking here in Oklahoma, and you may be interested to look at Florida Tax Watch. They did a study similar to what are those real costs and are we funding appropriately, and they found that Florida virtual school to be they called it a bargain for taxpayers. On the next slide, Wisconsin in 2008, and while I realize that is some time ago, they had the same questions and concerns, and they did an audit of virtual learning in their in their state, and found that overall the state's virtual charter school costs were reasonable and the funding they received were in line with their cost. And at the time, that cost was $6,500 per pupil revenue. Another quote from the Center on Reinventing Public Education, which I think is going to be spoken to in the next presentation, so I will move on. I would like to quickly go through other state funding models. We have looked at what some other states are doing. Have to remember that school funding in Oklahoma is very complicated. School funding in other states are complicated, and I wouldn't want anyone to look at a quick blurb on what funding might look like in any state, but I did give you 5 examples of what some other states are doing. One piece that I forgot to mention on this slide is Ohio does some facility funding for virtual charter schools. They allot $250 per pupil funding for facilities for brick and mortar schools, and $25 for, we may have corrected that, I see that now, for virtual charter schools.
Dr. Wilkinson, we're going to go ahead and stop you right there. Now, we do have some time built into our calendar, members, at the end. We have about 10 minutes just for questions and answers. So let's get through our other presentations. We will come back to you. So if you have questions for her, we'll try to get those in. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilkinson. I do look forward to sitting down and talking with you in the last 10 minutes or at another time to get down some additional costs that I mentioned in the beginning that we had. At this time, we'll ask Darrell Glover, the COSA Cooperative Council for Oklahoma School Administration. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for inviting COSA to be here. Representing Dr. Deering, she has a board meeting today and could not attend, so I'm happy to present the material that we prepared. In November 2018, COSA prepared a response to questions regarding transparency and accountability of Oklahoma's virtual charter schools. The May 2018 Virtual Schools in the U.S. research paper by the National Education Policy Center and Oklahoma State Department of Ed data, the largest virtual charter school in Oklahoma, served as the research basis for that white paper. This paper, in this presentation, provides a response to an interim study request to examine the real cost per student for virtual schools as opposed to brick and mortar traditional schools. The research basis for this interim study response paper includes a summary of research positions presented in the following reports: the May 2019 Virtual Schools in the U.S. by the NEPC, the June 2016 Call to Action by the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, and the February 2018 Response to Information Request by the Education Commission of the States. In addition to the sources above, COSA has gathered information from the State Department of Education. Although COSA's response paper addressed many of the low performance issues and problems with virtual education that is also cited in the research articles, this paper will address only virtual school funding, and below are the summaries of those findings. The Education Commission of States, their findings were this: virtual schools, charter schools, have unique characteristics that make it difficult, if not impossible, to fund them through traditional school finance formulas. These characteristics include unlimited school size and unlimited enrollment borders. Several states have created funding formulas specific to virtual charter schools, providing less money per student than is allotted for students in brick and mortar schools. Such states include Colorado, Georgia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. They did say, the Education Commission stated there were 4 areas that caused these funding issues: student enrollment size, obviously statewide versus geographically unlimited, statewide versus geographically limited, pardon me. The size of the schools, traditional schools and charter schools, you can predict size because of the geographics. With statewide schools, you cannot. So it's unpredictable growth. So their solution from the Education Commission of States was to cap virtual school growth or account for loss of students that traditional schools receive through the funding formula. Student counts for funding, seat time, funding, and virtual and attendance rules are also an issue that the Education Commission came up with. Their solution, where states could move to using course completion as a factor in funding instead of just enrollment. Florida requires not only completion, but students must also pass end of course assessments in order for the school to receive funding. Finally, the cost of providing educational services, travel, facility maintenance, construction, are estimated, according to the Education Commission, at a 23.8% reduction in costs from traditional schools. Their solution would be that states could adjust funding formulas to take into account reduced cost of educating virtual students. Georgia, they cite at 61%. Pennsylvania is the total per pupil funding minus transportation, adult ed, and debt services, which would be your bonding. And Colorado is 3.9% less. Ohio is full funding minus at-risk costs, ELL costs, and career tech costs. Next, I want to talk about the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Their research document was titled A Call to Action. Listed below are a couple of quotes reflecting their concerns. Their quote is: the well-documented, disturbingly low performance by too many full-time virtual charter public schools should serve as a call to action to state leaders and authorizers across the country. They also say that it's time for state leaders to make the tough policy changes necessary to ensure this model works more effectively than it currently does for the students it serves. The recommendations they bring are that states study the establishment of criteria for enrollment in full-time virtual charter schools based on factors proven necessary for student success. Call on states to seek guidance from experts and researchers in determining responsive levels of funding based on real cost of full-time virtual charters. Recommend states establish valid cost levels for operating full-time virtual charter schools via a performance-based system like the Education Commission stated. Clarifies that the National Association of Public Charter Schools does not support these policy options for brick and mortar charters. The suggestions are tailored to the unique problems that have emerged among full-time virtuals. They also suggest that states seek guidance from experts to determine responsible levels of funding. They cite an Augenblick, Pilek, and Associates study that found that virtual costs were 93 to 98% of brick and mortar costs, as was presented before. But they also cite a Thomas B. Fordham Institute study that says the average cost for full-time virtual was $6,400 compared to $10,000 for brick and mortar schools per student. They provide examples from 4 states with competency-based funding. Florida passed the end of the course exam. Minnesota, course completion requirement, has a course completion requirement. New Hampshire, they have competencies must be mastered. And Utah, it's based on the credits earned, is how they get their funding. The final research piece is from the National Education Policy Center. It shares that most literature examining the actual cost of virtual schools finds that virtual schools can operate for less funds than traditional schools. Ohio Legislative Committee on Education Oversight, considering actual costs, found that the 5 existing virtual schools in their state were able to operate with 65% of the funding provided to traditional public mortar school, brick and mortar. Similarly, Dodd reported the virtual school was able to meet annual yearly progress with 65% of the funding provided to traditional schools. Gillis was another study. They found the annual virtual school was able to operate at 65% of traditional funding. Barber concluded that it only cost between 7 to 16% less to operate one district-based virtual school compared with a traditional school. Finally, and that was a district-based virtual school. Finally, an analysis of virtual schools in Pennsylvania found that all but one reported, quote, significant surpluses of revenue over expenses and were amassing significant net assets. Butler, Battaglino, Haldeman, and Lawrence, basing their comparison on the national average overall per pupil cost of $10,000 for traditional brick and mortar schools, suggested the actual cost of virtual schools ranged from $5,100 to $7,700. And they examined the profit motive of many of the education management organizations. It is this potential profiteering, particularly when it represents corporate profits, that has prompted legislators to propose reducing or limiting virtual school per pupil resource allocations in 8 states in 2017 and 6 states in 2018. The final recommendations not focused on funding include slowing or stopping growth in the number of virtual and blended schools and the size of their enrollments until the reasons for their relatively poor performance have been addressed. Suggest implementing measures to require virtual and blended schools to reduce their student-to-teacher ratios, and finally identifies the need to sponsor research on virtual and blended learning programs and classroom innovations within traditional public schools, which has been the approach COSA has used to research and develop a blended learning framework for our traditional schools to implement virtual education when needed.
Members, we have about a little over a minute for questions. Representative Walter, we'll start with you.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming. I'd like you to comment on a slide that unfortunately was in Dr. Wilkinson's presentation. She identified virtual charter school administration costs at 15% relative to the 26% spent on faculty. TPS, my district school in China, pays about 3.6% in administration. Did your study find that virtual charter schools spend a greater proportion of their money on administrative costs?
We did not study that in this for this particular presentation. The reported cost is around 3%. In the previous study that we had, what we found was that the, cost that they spent for their private EMO was considered in their audit for administrative services, and that was 10% more.
Senator Sharp, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Wilkinson, related to Florida, which is Senate Bill 54, which I ran, which it is, I think would be a good deal for the buck, because as you progress there in your conversation, that they are funded based on the progression of the child through the course and the completion of the course. Would that not be the best way of which to eliminate the problem we have, instead of login time, 40 assignments in a 44-day period, that's less than one assignment per day?
That
Is there a
is-
better way than doing it the way we're doing it here in Oklahoma?
That is, definitely one of the recommendations in the research, and one that we tend to agree with.
Okay, again, we have more questions than time, so we will hopefully follow back around with you. Thank you.
Hey, Ms. Glover, look forward to having additional questions with you at the end or after this is over. This time we'll ask Richard Haynes to be recognized superintendent of Spiral Public Schools. Mr. Haynes, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair. I hope you keep me online. I'm a talker, so you have to watch my timing. I've also come to realize real quick, it's a good deal to have PowerPoint, so you don't have to look at the person talking so much, but we'll make this do that. What the committee has right now before you guys is just a snapshot. My goal in the next 10 minutes is to just kind of bring in all these national numbers and make them real for real schools. You know, we're an average school in Eastern Oklahoma. We have approximately 1,050 kids in our school, K through 12. They employ about 83 teachers, several support staff. And so we like to just think of ourselves as just average meal on numbers, but not average on effort. We do everything we can to speak into our kids' lives and make a difference. And I hear people talk a lot up here about real cost. And so I get passionate about real cost when it comes to kids. And, you know, I'm not biased. In 1970, a 90-pound, freckle-faced, redheaded girl talked her mom and dad into trying out for the baton twirler, so it's on what they do in the band. And because she had 5 siblings, she wasn't able to do that. And they finally said, yes, we'll let you go do that. So she goes to the pep club, and she goes up to the sponsor of the pep club and says, hey, I want to be a dancer. And the pep club sponsor looked at her and said, well, that'll be $20. And of course, what she didn't know is that that particular lady's mom and dad worked in the tomato fields from 7 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, and then worked out in the cannery from 4 to 8 that night. So she was raising her siblings, 2 of which had already quit high school. And she said, I don't have $20. And she said, you don't have any business in trying out for this. And so she walked from there, walked home, and looked her mom and dad in the face and said, I quit school, I'm done. And so she had a very loving principal come to her house that afternoon and said, what are you doing quitting? And she said, I'm not going back there. I'm not going to be treated that way. And so through that process, the principal had a good conversation with her and says, here's what I'll do. Trina, that's my mom. She goes, I'll take care of you. She goes, I'll bring your work to you on Monday. You have it done. You give it back, and we'll take care of you, and we'll get you graduated. She's the only person that's graduated on that side of my family high school. Everybody else dropped out. So the need for alternative forms of education, virtual is there. There's no question about that. But it has to be done right. And when we talk about real cost, numbers are important. 3 years ago, I went through reduction in force in my hometown. I was born and raised there, went to school there for 12 years, come back and taught science there, coached there, and I was actually teaching with teachers who taught me. And so because of the lack of funding during that crisis 3 years ago, I had to bring 10 of them in on the first night after spring break and look them in the eye and tell them they didn't have a job. 2 of them had taught me in school. And so when I talk about numbers, I know about numbers. I know what it's like about relationships with those numbers. So what I try to do here is just be very transparent and honest with you about our school. If you look at some of these items you have here, you'll see there's about 3 or 4 different funding categories that I gave you. One of those categories is our 12-month salaries. This is just what I felt like would be a difference between a brick and mortar school and a virtual school. If you look at the 12-month salary side of things, you'll see between 4 custodians, 1 mechanic, 1 nurse, 1 full-time librarian, 1 part-time librarian, that costs our school district $357,000. Now, let me step back. Our estimate of needs was just approved, and it's about $9.3 million. So that's about our budget, 9.3 million. So that particular salary group right there, $357,481. We just were very fortunate to pass a bond in the spring. That bond covered transportation and building repairs is all that covered. It's a $1.5 million bond. Our transportation ate up about $495,000 of that, 6 buses. The other part went to building renovations. All that information is there for you to look at. If you look also on the one that says janitorial, $276,650. That's strictly utilities and janitor supplies. That's what our brick and mortar school encumbers every year regardless. We have to pay our bills. And those are things that I think that are important to take into account when we start talking about real numbers. There is a particular one on there I don't have it in front of me, it's fuel. Fuel cost for our bus routes is $50,000. Now, Dr. Hines spoke to our foundation aid salary for transportation. We do get that, it's $62,000. So just fuel is $50,000. That doesn't cover the 5 bus drivers at 5,000, or excuse me, 12 bus drivers at 5,000 apiece, of another $60,000. So even though there's some things there, brick and mortar still encumbers a lot more of those situations than what we get back in particular areas. Another thing that's important to understand is that we offer extracurricular activities. I'm big on that. I think there's a lot of value to students and young adults when they're involved in things outside of the normal classroom setting. I think the relationships that are built, the things that they go through, help build strength and moral fiber to them. And so we're big on that. Not that that's the most important thing, because I'm a coach, but I'm most importantly an educator. I used to tell people all the time, I teach football and I coach science. That's what I do. And so when it comes to these types of situations, we are first and foremost educators. And so when we have the opportunity to get people involved in extracurricular activities, I want all my kids doing something extracurricular activity. It keeps them involved, it keeps them engaged, and like your grandma and grandpa used to tell you, it keeps you out of trouble. And so with that being said, I've got a little snapshot here. I didn't provide it for you, but I had my football coach run me a little expenditure analysis of what it actually costs just to put a football player on the field, equipped properly and safely. It's about $1,000 a kid. A helmet's going to run you about $300 in your suit and all those other situations. So about $1,000 for every time you see the kid running up and down the football field. Now, I'm not just football. If you go to Oklahoma, band. You know, if you look at your band members, between uniforms and the upkeep of their instruments, I had my band lady send me some of that information. On the low end, depending upon the instrument, it's about $1,500 per child. On the upper end, $4,500 per child that you see going up and down these fields on Friday nights or any of these band competitions. We have 57 band members right now. We have about 95 football members between 6th grade to 12th grade. So you can kind of put those numbers into comparison when we talk about costs that we encumber outside of the normal classroom. Me and Representative Kiger have already had a strong talk about that on education and so forth of that nature. So with all those type of numbers that we throw out there, we talk about real costs, and I will leave my time, Madam Chairman, with this one thing. Real costs don't necessarily show up at the bottom line. Real costs show up sometimes on some of the things that I provided the committee. 3 years ago, we had a local district that had built a brand new gym. And so we go over to play these gentlemen and ladies in a basketball game. Well, I'm about spirit. And so I'm telling my kids, do something fun, get the papers, and who's that, and all this other type of stuff. And so they do. That's not putting my mouth. They bring the papers, and here they go, and it's a brand new facility. They're throwing papers everywhere, and everything's going everywhere, and I think, oh, Lord, what did I just do? And so I called the senior over there and said, son, every spigot gets picked up. He goes, yes, sir. So as soon as that was over with, he went and got trash bags and brooms, and that whole suit section picked up that whole gym. And then I started getting emails from administrators because they didn't stop there. The next time they would play somewhere, they picked up the whole gym. The next time they played, they picked up the whole gym. I've just put in front of these gentlemen a couple of Facebook reports. Now that was 3 years ago. This just happened last week. 2 young ladies that had been playing softball at 12:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon at Diane, gets in their car, puts on their cheerleading suits, runs to cheer a football game over at Roland, Oklahoma. Once the game's over, it's about 10:30 at night. Everybody's left except 2 people. Those 2 young ladies, guess what they're doing? They're going up and down those bleachers, picking up trash on both sides. And so when you talk about real cost, I know what real cost looks like. You know, I know what it's like to look across the table at somebody that taught you with PE and say you don't have a job anymore in respects. I know what it's like to watch kids that have you spoke into because of the opportunity to develop a relationship with, not over a computer, but face to face, belly button to belly button, riding a bus at midnight, getting home late, knowing that relationship you build with them, that they can speak to their kids when they're done. So, I hope I didn't go over my time up here, but
No, sir, you did very well. Thank you. We have about a minute for, questions for the superintendent. I don't see any questions for you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, at this time, because we really cut Dr. Wilkinson off, we're gonna call her back up, and then we're gonna start with Representative Dills and her question.
Or Dr. Wilkinson went too long. I would hope at some point that I could make 2 or 3 points on those last few slides, if and when you find that appropriate.
Why don't we go ahead and let you do that, and then we will recognize.
Okay.
Representative Dills.
Yeah, I did just want to make one point, because I think all of us that have spoken on this topic today have referenced different types of research. I tried to give you a point that came based primarily from INACL, COSA gave you information from other types of sources, and you can see that there are, as is usual, differences in the research. I did, as I'm going to present some research that we've done on virtual charters in the next study, but the statewide virtual charter school board is very interested in being a part of research. And so I would want to put to this committee today for future, as you go into the, fall months and thinking about the legislative session ahead, that we are the agency that I think is poised and has the resources needed to do a study based on the real cost or any other aspect of online learning. The mission of the Virtual Charter School Board is just to support online learning opportunities for students, and that's both full-time virtual charter schools, full-time programs in local community schools, supplemental courses for students. So I would just like to say that as you listen to all this research, you might think, what research project really needs to be conducted in Oklahoma for Oklahoma students, for Oklahoma schools, that the Virtual Charter School Board, a state agency here to serve you, might be able to support. I also wanted to just point out a couple of slides, because I didn't get to the actual information about Oklahoma virtual charter schools. I did include one slide that in FY 2015, when the virtual charter school office actually opened, there's the number of students that were selecting full-time virtual charter school education, just a little over 7,000 students. At the conclusion, just 4 years later in 2019, that's increased by a little more than 10,000 students. So we can see that our families are making this choice, and so how do we manage it as best possible to get the best financial result, the best academic result overall. I did include enrollment that you can look at just to show how the different schools have grown, but I wanted to point out this slide. So if INACL is saying that a 93 to 98% of traditional school per pupil revenue would be reasonable for the virtual charter schools. You can see that at the end of 2018, the schools in Oklahoma are actually receiving a little less than that percentage. Of course, they're different by school, because schools have different students, and those students come with different weights. But I did think that was important to notice.
Thank you. We're gonna have to get to questions. Representative Dills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wilkinson, for your presentation. My question is, if some schools are able to spend so much money on marketing, do you believe that all of the funding they receive is necessary?
We did look at marketing. We're state agency, so we look at it in terms of the legal costs. I did check with those that are experts in Oklahoma cost accounting. There is coding for that type of expenditure, and at this time we don't know that there were any funds due to marketing that were illegal. It is a question, it's a question that this committee should be asking, because you have to balance, okay, Oklahoma's chosen to be a choice state. So where is that appropriate balance between making sure that parents, that families know what their choices are, and maybe an oversaturation in marketing? So I don't know that I have a complete answer to that question, but I do think it's a fair question.
For follow-up?
Right, we understand that the marketing part is legal. The question was just, do you believe that all of that funding is necessary?
I don't have an answer to that.
Thank you.
Representative Kiger, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got two questions I'll ask for follow-up in just a moment, but mine goes back to the dollars, the taxpayer dollars that are spent. I support totally for those to go toward the education. I mentioned in the opening that I've got concerns on money that's spent for recruiting, bonuses, marketing that we talked about just a moment ago. I know that there's a lot of nights I watch Channel 8 News, and there's always a good charter school on that. Does that come out of the money that's allocated per student that you've got in your presentation, or is that additional money?
You know, I think that's a fair area for study. I will tell you that what our understanding is, because we look at all kinds of financial records through the year, is that it's a kind of a balance between money that comes out of the general fund of the school and funds that are spent on the side of the management company.
For follow-up?
On one of the pages on virtual education considerations, it's got the different percentages. One is board/sponsor, says 6%. Can you talk a little bit about that money and what it goes to, what it goes for?
Remember that was a national study, so 6% was the number that they saw nationally. In Oklahoma, there is a cap on an oversight fee. It's 5%, so any authorizer can take 5% of the foundational state aid, not going in and taking their textbook money or anything like that, but 5% of the foundational state aid. The contracts that the virtual charter school board has put in place are at 3%.
Senator Sharp, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Wilkinson, as you know, I've contacted you several times requesting information. One of the questions that has been asked is, have I made an attempt at which to address some of these issues before the statewide virtual charter board? Would you please clear that up? Have I made that attempt?
You have not attended any statewide virtual charter school board meeting, if that's what you're asking. I'm not sure what you're asking.
Follow-up?
Thank you very much. I have made the attempt through what's called a declaratory ruling, with which to present documentation to the statewide virtual charter school board. That's the question. Attending one is basically one thing, but actually attempting at which to present documentation. Have I not made that attempt on an August 28th meeting, of which now you decided which to do an internal investigation? Is that not correct?
You have in an email to me mentioned that you may go forward with a declaratory ruling. I have not received any official notification of that. You had an August 28th meeting with board's council. I was not at that meeting, so I cannot speak to your conversation.
For follow-up?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, but the attempt was made, and of course, you were invited to the meeting. You decided not to attend the meeting, and the 3 assistant attorney generals did attend.
That's not true.
That's what they told me, sir.
No, I was on vacation, and we contacted board council, and there was a meeting. I was not there. I cannot speak to it.
Okay.
I just want to go one thing.
Senator Sharp, just a moment. This will be your last follow-up. I have 2 other people in the queue that I need to get to, and we are down to less than 2 minutes.
One of the problems of which I have is with the count. I know it's a student audit, as you mentioned, about being transferred from one school to another. But here's another problem, is the computer list, when it shows that there's over 6,000 unrecoverable, this is from your office, 6,000 computers of which Ethics says that they cannot recover. Here is another 2,000 plus of which are under retrieval. And from your audit in 2018, only 3 were recovered. That creates a problem for me.
Representative Caldwell, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Mr. Glover. questions based on your report. One, when we were doing the, state funding formula task force, it was brought up that, OSU and I believe OU and a couple other higher ed institutions actually charge more per credit hour for online classes than they did their traditional classes. Can you kind of help me understand the discrepancy on why our higher ed institutions say it's cost more to do online than traditional, but you're saying it's a significant, savings the other way?
Well, to clarify, I'm not saying it. I'm citing research from 3 different sources that are stating it. I can't speak to higher ed because I didn't research that.
Her follow-up.
To be clear, the bottom says your position statements agree with that, so I do think you're saying that. But beyond that, I would also ask, look, I'm great if we want to tie funding to performance, but would COSA be willing to support that across the board for all schools to tie funding to performance, since we have like a 40% remediation rate in the state of Oklahoma? I'm great with that, and if we're not willing to do that across the board, can you help me understand why we'd want to separate our system we want to tie it to one spot, not the other?
It's very clear in the research that was cited there from the National Association of Public Charters that there's unique situations with virtual education. I think the discussion and the work we're doing to develop virtual education opportunities, that would be a consideration. But as far as to compare traditional schools education to virtual, right now there's too many unique problems. That's why the National Association of Public Charters said that their recommendations don't apply to the brick and mortar.
I apologize, we're gonna have to get to my last person, and then, maybe you guys can have a conversation outside. Representative, Sterling, you are recognized, and 1 question only.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you tell me, and I don't know if you know this question or not, maybe I can get it from you later, how many, school districts offer a virtual piece to their students?
Yeah, I do not know that. I know that, there are many that have added them this year. We've seen multiple media, stories about different districts that are offering, virtual programs for their students. I will tell you that the Statewide Virtual Charter School Board is also engaged in kind of a pilot study with 5 rural districts, to help support them in implementing online education. And then the purpose for our office is to see, okay, what benefits and challenges do those rural districts who haven't engaged in any online learning at this point, what does that look like? We're already seeing some of the challenges that they find as they begin this problem. So we're hoping that at the end of 3 years, actually it's a 3-year program, but at the end of each year, building our understanding, we know what does it really take for rural districts to feel comfortable offering online so that all students have access to AP, all students have access to a chemistry or a physics class, a trig or a calculus class. And we partnered with Oilton, Dewar, Fox, Wagner, and Turpin.
Thank you, members. That concludes this study, but we are going to go straight into Representative Kiger and Senator Sharp's next interim study on charter